Okay, I think we will go ahead and make a start, and then the rest will join very shortly. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on plastic innovations, research projects and solutions. So this webinar is being delivered as part of our Action 2030 project, one of the key aims of which is to provide information and advice to members on how they can help address the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis through their professional work. So today's speaker is Rowan Byrne, who's Divisional Technical Principal Marine Ecology and Marine Plastics Lead at Mott MacDonald. Rowan is a pioneering leader and advocate for a reduction of plastics in our waterways and oceans, and has single-handedly driven the Mott MacDonald Marine Plastics Initiative.
Oh my God.
Rowan has been recognised for this work through a variety of awards in leadership and sustainability and environmental enhancements works, winning IEMA's Sustainability Leader in 2020. So I will stop now and hand over to Rowan, who will show us the actual detail. Thanks,
Brilliant. Thank you, Amber, and thank you, Christy, and thank you, Cyan, for giving me this opportunity to chat to you today. I'll make no apologies about being a bit animated, a bit passionate, and a bit carried away, probably. So I'll do my best to sort of between 20 to 30 minutes to chat to everybody about solutions to the plastics issue we have at the moment in plastic pollution. The main points I want to get across are that plastic is not our enemy. Plastic is definitely not our enemy. It's part of our sustainable future and has a massive part to play in our well-being, health, and general environmental conservation. It's just, excuse me, it's just unfortunate that the way we don't use it or use it or misuse it really, and it has consequences of that. And the longevity of plastics, because plastic is built to last, and the impacts it has, secondary, indirect, and direct impacts it has. But more importantly, as I said, it's part of our sustainable future. It's not the enemy, and we will focus on solutions of how to deal with this. So just to set the scene a little bit more, there's an awful lot of statistics out there about plastic. Cutting through the fog, you'll see some examples on the screen here now, and how much marine litter has increased by the percentages over the last number of decades. And even continues to increase. One of the more pertinent examples, which has accelerated the increase of plastic in the environment, will obviously be COVID, due to the number of single-use PPE, single-use polypropylene face masks and more, and everything that we've used with COVID to protect ourselves, and rightly so. But you will find that there is a huge amount of information out there. And post the Attenborough effect of the blue planet, which highlighted this many times, you'll see that there's probably changing information every day on the variety, the extent, the different types of polymers, the different sizes, and the amounts of plastic that are working their way into the marine environment. I know we can all read, so I won't really go through the slides per se, but just to give you an idea of the amount, I mean, the most important thing for me, obviously, is legacy, and the one thing I don't want to leave is a world where we leave a plastic legacy. You know, an example there, as you can see, is that plastic bottles take between actually 200 to 450 years to break down, depending on the environment. And the most isolated the most isolated areas on our planet, such as Henderson Island in the far western Pacific, South Pacific, sorry, is littered with plastic bottles. So much so that it has ecological impacts there as well. So sadly, there's probably no area of the Earth, no area of the planet that plastic hasn't touched, and it's something that we're responsible for and something we need to look at solution towards. But as I said, lots of statistics out there, lots of information out there, and it increases on a daily basis. Here we go, just more statistics for a bit of crack. As I said, I won't dwell too much on these. It's just to give you an idea that essentially, you know, there is particular sectors of our economy where we can make a difference, where we can create change. And we can really look to change the flow and stem the flow, or turn the tap off plastics working their way into the arterial networks from the terra firma land into the arterial networks of aquatic and riverine waterways and other sources of water flow into the marine environment, and then looking at those impacts. But as you can see, you know, a large amount of the plastics is single use. It also multiple use, but a large of it's not recycled. So there's opportunities here. So I'd like to emphasize that while we look at these plastic statistics, there's opportunities here, opportunities to make a change and make a difference. So if I can just make sure that the right slide stays here, what I wanted to just emphasize here was Our plastic problem gets bigger as the plastic gets smaller. In other words, plastic fragments. The large high density polyethylene plastics, the same sort of equivalent that you'll find in these pens and the same sort of stuff you'll find in hi-hats and just the hard plastic you'll find in computer hardware and even on the case of your phone, eventually will break down in the environment and come from a number of sources. But it's the arterial pollution pathway receptor model that works its way from land to the arterial network of rivers to the sea and via the beaches and then out into deep water oceans. It's what we have control over. So we should always try and look at the bigger picture here. Some of the solutions that we work in Mount McDonald is to try and look at the pathways of where the plastic starts, maybe turn the tap off and reduce the flow, where it is transported through the arterial river and aquatic networks and more, and how it gets to the deep water, how it gets to the ocean and then circulates in the ocean. Of course, not all plastic will float, giving its density, and a lot of plastic will sink. And then, of course, it hits the deep water abyssal zones, which are very insensitive to change because they have been existing for millions of years through evolution and more, and there's been very little anthropogenic impact. So I wanted to point out here that our plastic, when you see the Coke bottle or the Pepsi bottle or the Domestos bottles or any other brand that has a plastic bottle that you use at home, in the wrong environment, the bottle cap, the plastic bottle itself, even the oil canisters we use for our cars to service our engines, etc., they will eventually break down and become brittle and they fragment. And this is what causes an even bigger secondary problem on top of the initial problem of macroplastics being released into the environment. This slide I wanted to just emphasize, you'll find that there's many different sources of plastics working their way into the environment. And as you can see there, they come from marine paint, which also have plastics, hydrocarbons, and silicones in them. You'll also have building parts, you'll have textiles, of course. We're all very familiar with the washing machines and the innovations in washing machines to put filters in them to catch microplastics that work their way from polyester, from nylon, from plastic fibers and clothes and textiles. And then also from vehicles and the associated transportation of vehicles and the materials that they transport. One of them, which I'll refer to a little bit later, which is very much in the field of emerging plastics, emerging contaminants, is tire wear and tire particulates. And when you think about all the tires on the road, all the amount of vehicles on the road, and the wear and tear of tires and how quickly they're replaced. Of course, plastic is in tires, so fragments do work their way into the environment and have secondary impacts. But I wanted to just again emphasize the flow, the pathway pollution model, and the flow of plastics from our homes, the land, terra firma, terrestrial environments, and then into the river networks working their way into the sea. And when they do get there, they work their way from the surface to the deep water zones, and they interfere and affect and have a detrimental effect on flora and fauna, marine flora and fauna, particularly some endangered species and the different levels of marine critters you'll find in the different layers of the sea, all the way down to the deep water zones. As I said, not all plastic will float. Some plastic has a different density. So you find that it reaches the environments where humans shouldn't really have an influence in, these being the deep water zones. And of course, it also creates artificial habitats and creates fragmented habitats because of this material working its way down there. But you'll find in the majority of the cases, it's ingested. And then, of course, it has secondary effects on offspring, reproduction, population numbers, decline, boom and bust, etc. And we've all seen the documented pictures of seabirds mistaking particular fragmented, colored and different polymers of plastic as food sources and then regurgitating them to their chicks and the impacts it has on migratory and marine birds as an example. But it also has the same impact in the marine environment with food chains. Professor Brendan Godley and his team in the University of Exeter have documented the transmission of smaller plastics through the marine food chain. And initially, other research in Exeter has shown that they found polyurethane beads, the small beads that used to be in exfoliants on our faces when we'd wash ourselves in the shower. And those beads would actually work their way through the arterial network of our drains and shores and then work their way into the sea. And as I think it was 2016 or 2017, a professor, one of our colleagues from the University of Exeter, documented it in plankton. So they found the same type of plastic polymer bead in plankton, which is the basis of the marine food chain. You've got the zooplankton. You've got phytoplankton, zooplankton, and when you look at the basis of the food chain that has plastic in it, you can see how it migrates through the food chain all the way up into the actual apex predators. And Brendan has his team and other researchers have documented that pathway of certain plastics working their way through the food chain, assimilated into tissues of the predators in the sea, and then finally at the apex predators. So probably there's a question that we all need to think about: is who's at the top of the food chain? Who sits at the top of the food chain, and who eats fish? And who eats marine protein or marine byproducts? It's not a very difficult answer. You'll find that it's ourselves, depending on your choice. But my point being that one of the main things that regulates our Earth's temperature, the ocean, which we pollute, and the flora and fauna that's in it, is being continually used as a dumping ground. And of course, in anything like that, it has an impact on the survivors who use that environment or use the ecosystem services or the natural capital that's there in order to survive. So it's worth thinking about that transmission and how we can stop that flow. So I won't go through too much of this slide, but it's more there's more species in trouble. There's more increased research has shown that that there's marine mammals, seabirds. There's a prevalence and an increase in plastics working its way and being transmitted into marine flora and fauna, as well as freshwater. I think a recent study by Cranfield University, published this year, showed that some of the freshwater streams in Greater Manchester and the Yorkshire Dales are highly polluted with over the last number of years. So you'll find that if they're polluted in the freshwater, then they'll eventually work their way to the marine environment. So it's something we need to do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need to stem the flow of plastics. We need to stop the flow of plastics working its way into an environment that we depend on and other animals depend on in order to support ecosystems and biodiversity. But as I said, there's many reports of plastics of different guises, polymers, shapes and sizes being ingested by freshwater, marine, terrestrial organisms. And it's something that we need to be very, very active about solving. I'll just give you one example, really. I'll point to my screen here now, but you can see a picture here at the base of a coelacanth. Now, a coelacanth, just for argument's sake, for those of you that don't know deep water fishes, they're actually amazing. They live at approximately 3,500 feet deep. They're a deep water fish, and they're rarely ever seen. I think Ernest Hemingway in 1936 was one of the was a famous. Well, he was obviously a famous novelist, but he liked deep water fishing. And I think the last time they recorded a coelacanth, I think in the Caribbean where he used to fish, was in 1936, and it was assumed to be extinct. But over the last number of decades, some deep water trawls and technology have brought them up. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is that this coelacanth lives in 3,500 feet, 1,000 plus 2,000 meters deep in the ocean near the seabed. And when they pulled one of them up, they found a Lay's crisp packet in its stomach. Now, this is a fish that wouldn't normally come have any anthropogenic influence or be influenced by ourselves. And within its stomach, when they opened it up, they found trace elements of plastic, single-use plastic packaging, and a crisp packet. Pretty disturbing to think that we have a deep water environment that has very little interaction with humans per se, and they are ingesting our waste products and they're reaching these very, very sensitive areas of the environment. It's more to think about. There's lots and lots of stuff out there. I mean, I read recently that limpets and barnacles on the seashore, one of the secondary impacts of plastic pollution is leached chemicals from the plastic, which reduces their ability to synthesize a protein, which keeps them adhesed to the rock. So in actual fact, it would have an impact on rocky and intertidal shores as well. You don't need to go to the deep water environment. And that's a secondary impact from leached plastics, not just the actual ingestion of the plastic polymer itself. So it's all a bit doom and gloom, isn't it? There's lots of stuff out there, so I would encourage you to get in to find out about all the different elements out there and the impacts of plastics, but of course, more importantly, what we can do to solve it. So in Mott MacDonald, we have a number of projects and even more growing. And we looked at the sources of plastics a number of years ago and tried to find the source, well, the sources of them really. And there was an expression I heard a couple of years ago in a book, and I thought, before you can get a measure something, before you can manage something, you need to get a measure of it. So I thought, right, we need to get a measure, we need to get a baseline, we need to understand what the issue is here, and we need to look to technology and innovation in order to try and deal with this, to help establish the problem and then focus on the solution. So one of the things we did was we worked with Anglian Water, the paper we publish next year, and the University of East Anglia, to choose a site in Newmarket, a wastewater treatment work in Newmarket. And we looked at the flow of plastics flow of waste, let's be honest, wastewater treatment works, organic material and waste, plastic and anthropogenic and natural, working its way into the system. Because wastewater treatment works are epicenters for waste in particular catchments. So we looked at Newmarket. We had a project in Newmarket, Anglian Water, and we looked at all the different types of plastics that were working their way into the wastewater treatment works. And we identified them. We went through them. We took samples every month and we went through them all. And a colossal amount of wet wipes, polyurethane, plastic-based wet wipes, and cellulose, which I'll talk about in a sec, but a huge amount, and quite distressing because these wet wipes fragment and they break into smaller meso, macro, and nano particles, and they work their way through the systems, which are not designed to collect these, actually into the back into the system. So the circularity of waste there as well. But anyway, so what we did is we went through it and we looked at all the different types of plastics that were there, as you can see, from the polyethylene, polyurethane, polyvinyl, polypropylene, and the classifications in plastics are really good because you can see the different types of plastics and the polymers that are in them by the plastic recycling codes that are on them. So we went through a large number of samples, and this is what example of what we found. So a wastewater treatment work is designed to deal with waste, mostly organic and human in nature. But what we found was skips upon skips. Along with the wet wipes, which are huge, we found, going from left to right here, we found single-use cigarette lighters. We saw polyvinyl hose piping. We found single-use coffee cups. We found some sort of dog toy. We found highlighting pens, caps. We found a lot of single-use takeaway, fast food, confectionery, sweets and things like that as well, wrapping. So you've got different rolls there, chocolate rolls. You've got Quality Street. You've got tomato ketchup sauces and things like that as well. And then going back again, we found a pen. We found some O-rings. We found somebody's toothbrush. So not obviously losing their toothbrush. We found latex gloves. And then the gas thing we found was the sticker that says "Do not flush," and this is usually the sticker you find on wet wipe packages saying "Do not flush." Anyway, so this is just an example of the tonnage of plastics that work their way into wastewater treatment works that isn't organic. And if we look at it logically, a lot of this shouldn't be there. It just really shouldn't be there because it's single use. If disposed of and recycled properly, and the infrastructure is there as part of the circular economy, it will make a big difference. Make a big difference. So there's a very, very quick win here. So we looked at different samples, as you can see, and we categorized them along with the normal sort of human waste associated materials. You find a huge amount of wet wipes, as you can see there, sky high. And these are also a big problem because they don't biodegrade. So we looked at flushable versus non-flushable, all the different types of plastics. But essentially, we found that 80% of the material there should never have been flushed, which is mind-blowing. So, toilets are for poo, paper, and pee. They're not designed for plastics, the other P. And there is also other sources how plastic get into the catchment and the waterways. But at the same time, they just shouldn't be there. So one of the things we came across was of all the samples we did, we extrapolated the large amounts of tonnage of wet wipes that were there. And you can see that from the information here, like over the last number of years, we had nearly 50 tons of wet wipes has been removed from the Newmarket wastewater treatment process site since January 2015. And then we extrapolated on a population level. We can go a lot more with this because we can look at it at a catchment level. rural, semi-rural, urban, semi-rural, urban, and city. So there's a lot to look at here. And the water industry is very keen on understanding these baselines and dealing with this issue. But of course, the most important thing we can do is stem the flow, stop the tap, turn the tap off, make sure these plastics are recycled properly, make sure they're reused, make sure we ignore the single-use alternatives and maybe look at multiple use, but we can do more. You know, we can be that agent of change. But this was a baseline that gave us an idea of the true impact that's in wastewater treatment works. And of course, if I give you one example, this is only one wastewater treatment work based in Anglian Water Newmarket, of which they have them, just the one company alone, 190 plus sites, including pumping stations. So you start to get an idea of the scale when you look at the globe, the UK populace, going from there. Again, it's just to give you more thoughts about this. So we looked at the technology. I was home a number of years ago in Howth, County Dublin, and I grew up by a harbour. Probably one of the reasons why I became a marine biologist. And I know there's technology about where waters can be cleaned and plastic can be removed. And one of the options available at the moment, which Mott MacDonald has personally sponsored with a number of companies in Ireland, Panda Recycling is one of them, and we've also fitted a new one in Cardiff, and we're looking at other spots as well. Is we support innovation in order to remove plastics from the marine environment. And one of the things we've done here is we funded a number of sea bins in Dublin, in Howth County Dublin, and we're looking at the baseline of plastics in the marine environment. And we send our colleagues out there once a month to go through the plastics, as you can see what's in the bin, under rigorous health and safety, and we identify the baseline of plastics that are there. Now, the sea bin is a conduit. It's a tool for us to understand very much about what's out there, what's happening. And as you can see, there's a picture in the center there that has sort of turbid water with all sorts of bits and bobs in it. And then if you just go a bit to the right, 24 hours later, it had cleaned that area of the harbour. And it's also helped with health and safety and more. And we have an educational program there as well, where we invite schools down to get involved in this. And it works really, really well. Again, it's a conduit to understand the baseline. And working on that basis, it's really given us an idea of the type of plastics. Now, we've even found plastic milk bottles that were introduced in the 1970s in Ireland after after glass bottles were replaced, and we found, and this is where it gets really interesting. I found a number of barnacles growing on plastic bottles that had been in the water for 30 or 40 years, and the reason I know that is that the last time the dairy which made the plastic bottle in the 1970s, that was the last bottles they made, was found before they moved on to Tetra Pak and cartons and stuff. I can only find one of them still maintained in the Natural History Transport Museum in Dublin on a milk float. So I knew the age of it. But when I looked at it, I saw Semibalanus balanonoides and similar barnacles growing on this plastic substrate. Now, that's mind-blowing because a secondary impact of this shows us that there's biodiversity change in the coastal environment. And species are changing their behavior, their choice of habitats, and I suppose, the ecosystem services they supply, and in general, it has a negative impact on biodiversity. All for another discussion, probably, to look at biodiversity net gain. But what I saw was a normal rocky shore barnacle that grows on rocks, growing on plastic floating bottles. And of course, plastic will also act as a conduit to transport invasive species across the continents. And given that it floats, some of it does, and like gooseneck barnacles and equivalent marine critters and sea squirts will etch a ride on them, and they'll also establish themselves in areas where they wouldn't normally be dominant and can dominate. So the sea bin has also helped us look at this sort of biodiversity change and is ongoing there as well. It's really quite a cool tool. It takes a lot of work. You need a lot of people on board, but it's a very good tool. I mean, it won't save the world, but it will give you an idea of what you're dealing with, and it works 24/7 on a pump and removes the plastics. So we start to get an idea. So it's a really, really good starting point. Again, solution focused. The final project that we have at the moment, there is more coming on, but is we worked with the Environment Agency, and I'm very keen to understand the transmission of plastics as regards tire particulates, working their way into the arterial network of rivers and streams. This is a small outfall, an overflow outfall in Borton Park in Milton Keynes. For 18, 19 months, we had an overflow, as you can see there, net, which would catch anything coming out of it. It didn't stop the flow, the water flowed out, but I was very keen to understand the meso and nano particulates of plastics. Well, I say nano, but meso and micro plastic particulates that would come out, especially from a waterway that has a lot of traffic going over it. So you could have cigarette butts, you could have tire particulates, you could have solid waste, and different types of fragmented plastic. So we've had that in there for 18 or 19 months, and quite excited. We've just sent that off to the lab for analysis. So this is something that we'll be reporting on next year. But it was working with the conservation volunteers and River Guardians and Environment Agency to look at establishing a baseline and the transmission of these different new and possibly emerging pollutants working their way into our waterways. But it was a plastic base. So there's just a little bit here about tire wear. One of the things I wanted to emphasize was that the large number of vehicles on the road, the choices we can make, the maintaining of our vehicles, the way we drive. But essentially what you'll find is that microplastics do work their way from many, many sources into our environment. They do have an impact on our survival. I think to probably end, there was one story that I think shocked me in my tracks. I remember being on a panel with Professor Brendan Godley in Kensington, the National Geographic Society in Kensington, many years ago. And Brendan stood up in front of a room of 300 plus people, and it shocked me. He said, "Everybody in this room, including myself, will have plastic in their system." And he's right. At some point in our lives, due to food sources, due to contamination, due to interaction with plastics, you'll find that plastics will be in your system. And documented, well documented, shown that that plastics can be endocrine disruptors in pregnant females and more, and they can have different impacts on our hormonal levels. So the reason why I say that is that we seem to be pumping in colossal amounts of plastics for the last number of decades into the environment, and there is impacts on that. But the one thing I would love everybody listening to do and everybody watching this post webinar is be an agent of change. I did do a small TED talk earlier this year, which you can find online, about being an agent of change. And it was based on St. Patrick's Day. You couldn't ask an Irishman to give a talk on St. Patrick's Day, but I did. And I thought we can draw parallels here, because St. Patrick 15 centuries ago was an agent of change. He was told that he's attributed of ridding paganism from Ireland and introducing Catholicism. But he was that agent of change, and he made a difference. So what I'd ask everybody watching this, both now and in the future, is be part of the solution. Look at where you can have some change at home, small steps. Look where you can influence and what you can do in order to maintain and develop new solutions to this, but more importantly, stem the flow of plastics going into the environment, because it has an impact on yourself, your family, your well-being, and the environment. And I think pretty much, there you go, blank screen. I think pretty much that's it. But I've whizzed through that. I do apologize. There's a lot to discuss, but if I can help in any way, or anyone wants to chat or has any questions post the webinar, please let me know. But yeah, if you can, be part of the solution, and I'll leave it to there and say thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rowan. That was brilliant. Just, yeah, if anyone's got any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box now or in the chat, and Rowan's here to answer them if you do have any. But if not, oh, Amber's got her hand up. Is that a question?
Yeah, I actually do have a question. Oh, sorry, my camera's covered. We are writing guidance at the moment on the sustainable use of materials in ecology and environmental management. So looking at survey methods and mitigation methods and things. Is this something that you look at in your work, and how ecologists might reduce their use of plastics or other unsustainable materials?
Great question, Amber. There's two ways of looking at it. Yes, ecologists should look at ways to identify plastics in the environment, because when the ecology team here in Moston, work that I do, when we go out to survey, I always say to them, document the plastics you see. Tell me what you see. Take pictures of all the plastics under a bridge because they're trapped there and where they're from. You know, you collect the data. I mean, we love the environment. So I would say, yes, look at the more evidence we can gather in order to influence policy and guidelines is by the suite of ecologists across all the SAIEM, where we can go out there and document. And in fact, you know, promote it, share it with your colleagues, do an Andy Warhol mosaic at the end of the year to say, look, we've done all this. Look at all the plastic we found in the different sites. But data, you know, real-time data shows the true impact of plastic. So yes, I mean, I'm happy to help where I can, but guidelines focusing on reduction and identification of plastics and diffuse pollution sources and plastic pollution sources, really, really important, because there is an inconsistency with if you were sampling plastics, some water companies or some other bodies would say we should go this route, we should go that route. So maybe we can find some common ground where common methodology could be outlined that shows that just to get the core elements of plastic pollution could work. But more importantly, when you're out there, document the plastic you see. You'll probably find crisp packets from the 1980s. You'll probably find all sorts. I mean, I know it sounds roadsides on highways. God, you just be lost in those, you know. And you'll find I call them legacy plastics. And you'll find legacy plastics that you'd be like, God, this was here before me. What's this doing here? Why isn't it in the bin? Do you know what I mean? So I would encourage everybody to play their part in that regard. And look, that's what we do best. We gather data, and then we make robust guidelines based on our data. So I'd definitely get involved in that and encourage people to do so.
Thank you. It's great. I don't know if you've got any more questions coming in. Please do ask them now if you have any.
Ask now or forever hold your peace. But as I said, I'm open to questions as well post the webinar. If somebody wanted to email and have a chat, there's no problem. The more, the better.
Yeah, I think, Christy, are you happy to call that?
Yeah, no, I can't see any questions coming in. So yeah, we'll leave it there if that's okay with everyone.
No problem at all. No
Yeah.
problem at all. I'm happy to do more support work if needed post the webinar, so there's no problems.
Great, thank you very much, Rowan, and thank you everyone as well for attending. I think that was really interesting.
Thank you for the opportunity, folks.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
All right, take it easy, folks. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.